briefly, I want to introduce our final chairperson, Ann Tenbrunzel. Ann is a member of our management department. She also does a great deal of work in ethics, published a lot, did her own PhD at Northwestern, but has been an important contributor to our faculty. With great pleasure, I introduce Ann Tenbrunzel.
Welcome to our final session, Directions for the Future, our final panelist. I'm pleased to introduce our first speaker, Sandra Waddock. She's the Galligan Chair of Strategy and a Professor of Management at Boston College's Carroll School of Management. She was the co-founder of their Leadership for Change program, the Initiative for Responsible Investing, which is now housed at Harvard Kennedy School. She's published extensively in this area. She inspired one of our previous speakers, Ante, in his dissertation. Her latest books are Sea Change, Making the Transition to a Sustainable Enterprise, and The Difference Makers. So welcome, big welcome to Sandra Waddock.
Thank you. Well, it's great to be here, and I've been looking forward to this conference for a long time. I'm going to say some things that are a little, let me see if I can, that are a little bit different than what you've been hearing. Because it's my perspective that the system that we currently have is leading us off collectively as humanity off a cliff. I think that the Global Compact, the MDGs, and the search for the common good, the theme of this conference, are wonderful events. I'm just concerned that they're not going to be sufficient to save humanity from itself, basically. So in the past few years, we've seen the global financial crisis, the meltdown of 2008, which was accompanied by huge mortgage and housing scandals, a whole series of other scandals. We know that we're facing massive climate change, and we know that the world is facing huge sustainability issues, including a growing gap between the rich and the poor. So consider that global population has quadrupled since 1900. And it's now approaching 7 billion people on Earth and projected to grow to about 9 billion people in the next 30 to 40 years. Consider that we're facing ecological constraints from the so-called progress that we have. And consider that what Auntie was talking about, in workplaces and in many other parts of our lives, we're facing a crisis of meaning. People do not see a lot of meaning in their lives, partly because spirituality has diminished for many people, but also because our workplaces don't provide many often don't provide many ways in which people can actually find meaning within their work. Most of us spend most of our time at work. Since forever, but particularly since 2000, have just highlighted some of those things. We also have what I would call a crisis of materialism and consumption. So that our economy is oriented, at least in the United States, towards consuming more and more and more stuff and gaining more and more and more stuff. And when I talk to my MBA students about this, that's it. That's what they think lives are about, is being consumers and gaining more. That's going to somehow be successful as people. I think also some of the factors that we see in the world today suggest that democracy is in question. When we look at the decision of the Supreme Court in January of 2010, that actually has the capacity to fundamentally erode democracy. So let's just think for a minute about some of the things. In the 1990s, what we saw happen, and we've heard about some of we have Sir Mark Moody Stewart here. In the middle here, we have some of the issues that Shell was facing in the 1990s. We had I know.
I'm going to switch mics here. The battery's probably dying.
Let me turn this off.
working.
Thank you. Is it working? Can you hear me? Okay.
I'll turn it up.
Okay. He's going to turn it up. Sorry about that. Because I can't stand still when I speak, so now I've lost this. Now I've lost a little clicker. But you can just see from this array of pictures the kinds of issues that we were facing in the 1990s. And simultaneously with all of this going on, we had the emergence of the World Wide Web, which essentially created corporations, put corporations into a world in which they were naked, as Don Tapscott says, or transparent whether they wanted to be or not. And then we came to the 2000s. And in the 2000s, of course, we had the Enron scandal, which was mentioned, which I understand is, from students here, is embedded in almost every course that they take in one way or another, so that they're hearing about these ethical issues that Enron, WorldCom, and all of these companies had. You had McDonald's facing the you know what? This is not working, so I'm going to. So much for trying to. Yeah, that would. Well, maybe there's one right here. Let me try that. Let me try this. Okay. Hello? Okay. So we had let me, I need these papers, either of them. We had all of the scandals that we know of, and then, of course, in 2008 and ensuing, we had all of the financial services industry scandals associated with the meltdowns and the poor mortgage lending practices and a lot of other speculation in global financial markets that created what some people have called a global financial casino. Now, in the same context, starting in maybe 20 or 25 years ago, but really exploding in the mid-1990s, we had the evolution of a lot of the institutions that we now see, and some of which we've been talking about at this conference. The Global Reporting Initiative started about 1999. 1998, the Global Compact in, of course, 2001 or so. But you have all of these other institutions which create what I have called in writing a responsibility infrastructure that pressures companies or provides a context in which companies can both become more responsible and articulate their responsibility publicly. And, of course, an array of other types of initiatives. And this, we could have many pictures that look like this with all of the different types of initiatives that now exist, to the point where it's kind of overwhelming for companies. And that is what I had called the responsibility infrastructure, consisting of basically three components: market, business-facing things, civil society enterprises, and, of course, what's not often recognized. Why a lot of the stuff on the left arises is because companies are trying to avoid regulations, but in some states, some nations, regulations have, in fact, begun to come about. For instance, in France, every company listed on the French Stock Exchange has to be issuing an ESG, or triple bottom line report, at this point. And that's true for a number of other countries now. So you see this emerging array of mandate as well. And then, of course, in this context, we have the two subjects that we've been talking about for at the most of this meeting, the Global Compact and the MDGs. So we're going here, in a sense, from the frying pan into the fire. I'm going to ask the question, is corporate responsibility enough? The issues that we face are systemic, and systemic issues, by their nature, demand systemic solutions. The current system that we have, as I just tried to articulate, favors economic over other kinds of interests. And it fosters the squandering of planetary resources and creates misalignment between corporate and social or human goals in many ways. Because, as we just heard in the last panel, companies are at least assumed to always be fostering the maximization of shareholder wealth. It favors growth in material and economic goods and generally overlooks, in many ways, the common good. Now, I will grant that corporations provide jobs, and some of those jobs provide meaning, and they provide economic stability for a lot of people. So that's sort of a given that underlies our whole economic system. But this system also favors entrenched wealthy interests over other types of interests, or the interests of the masses, in a sense. So if we continue business as usual, if we don't look fundamentally at the system, and so I'm going to disagree with the statement before that perhaps we don't need to rethink corporate charters, we don't need to rethink the purpose of the corporations. I think we may in fact need to do that. If we can consider that business as usual continues, we provide jobs, but corporations are, even if they undertake massive sustainability programs, to the extent that growth as an agenda remains embedded in their core purpose, to the extent that we consider growth the only measure of success, then planetarily we have a problem. Their purposes of maximizing shareholder wealth recognize too narrow a set of interests. They reflect, in my view, a badly broken system, a system that, on the whole, lacks integrity. Because one of the meanings of integral, is wholeness. And this is a system, if we're favoring consumption over other interests, if we're favoring materialism, if we're favoring the rich over the poor, that system does not have that kind of integrity, wholeness. And therefore the capacity to think about the common good becomes diminished. So Ed Freeman, who's the founder, the father, if you will, of stakeholder theory, talks about needing a new narrative for business. And I agree that that's exactly the kind of thing that we need to think about. So in that context, we have the Global Compact and the MDGs, and we've had a lot of talk about them. They've spawned numerous, the UNGC has spawned numerous other initiatives, including PRIME and the PRI, which we heard about yesterday. They foster the notion that business can both be good and be good for business. But when we think that sustainability or corporate responsibility always has to have a business case, then we may be misguided, because sometimes there are things that need to be done that don't necessarily have a business case. And I was at the Leaders Summit, the Global Compact Leaders Summit this past year, and the chairman of the World Economic Forum basically argued that it was, I won't say it here because it's Notre Dame, but it was nonsense, to use a more less colorful word than the one he used, to think that there's always a business case for social responsibility. And the MDGs have done a lot of good, and you can read what's there. Business engagement. Nelson and Prescott suggest there are a number of ways in which businesses can, in fact, be helpful in helping to achieve the MDGs. I'm not going to read through them because that's out there in the literature, and you can read them for yourself. But I would argue that even if businesses did everything that Prescott and Nelson suggest, that the system isn't going to be changed a lot. What we can see in the last 15 years is a lot has changed. We have this infrastructure we didn't used to have. We have businesses engaging in sustainability initiatives and corporate responsibility, and we heard a lot about those yesterday. And it's really, to the point where it was almost overwhelming what some businesses were doing to try to help. But to the extent that business as usual means increasing materialism, increasing consumption, and to the extent that the world and businesses do not tackle the issue of climate change, which some people, and sustainability, and you don't need to be, you can be a climate change skeptic, in my view, and still think that there's a huge sustainability crisis on this planet. Every single ecological system is thought to be in decline, every single one. And we are straining the Earth's capacity. Our food production system is stripping topsoil off of our planet and putting all kinds of pollutions into our rivers and streams and onto the land. It is inherently not a sustainable way to mass produce food. And now we're talking about a planetary population of 9 billion people in the near future. So we've seen not sufficient progress on the issues of sustainability or climate change. So I'm going to argue that growth is the problem. The mantra of growth is the problem. Materialism is the problem. And that we fundamentally need to rethink this concept of growth, that we always need to be growing. In fact, if you think about the fact that there are 1.4 billion youth in the world today who have no access to meaningful work at all, or work at all, never mind meaningful work, then productivity isn't the answer either, because more productivity means fewer jobs, not the more jobs that the world needs in order for people to live decent lives. That's the ILO's framing of decent work, decent lives. So we need new concepts, a new narrative, as Ed Freeman says, a narrative of what my colleague at Boston College, Juliet Shore, calls plenitude, or perhaps sufficiency, or what we came up with at the World Business as an Agent of World Benefit Conference, plenitude. And we need to have both the economic conversation and a conversation about what is real wealth or well-being or values. So economics is not value-free. Economics, despite what your finance professors will tell you, is embedded in a logic that the only value is monetary value. Okay? Well, as human beings, we know that there are other values that are necessary. The business case for corporate responsibility suggests we can do well and do good at the same time. But a societal perspective asks us to take ourselves beyond monetary considerations towards consideration of well-being. I'm just going to skip to... So we need to be thinking about well-being and finding measures of well-being. And there are some of these that have begun to pop up in various parts of the world. The Happy Planet Index, or the Genuine Progress Indicator. By the way, the U.S. doesn't do so great on the Happy Planet Index, or the GPI for that matter. And there's a divergence between GNP, which measures things like, the Japan crisis that's being faced. When they start to rebuild Japan, all of that will be value add to GNP. Really? Does that really tell us that people are better off in some way than they were before? And the flaws in GNP have been known since it was first introduced. So the purpose of business is not to make money. I always tell my students this. I don't know anyone who says the purpose of my business is to make money unless they're perhaps a financial speculator. Because if you say that, people say, well, that doesn't tell you the answer to the strategic question of what business are you in. You got to answer that in terms of purpose. So we've heard about purpose a little bit before, and we need to be arguing that we need to be changing so that businesses serve purpose. Their purposes serve the needs of society, and they serve the needs of the planet, which we need to maintain a set of conditions that support human existence. And I have more to say, but I will stop there in the interest of time.
If you are like me, you have a hard time remembering your questions after several presenters go by. So if there are any one or two questions that you would like to ask at this moment, we're happy to take them now. And if, yes.
Thank you. According to Julie Shore, it is a living a full, rich life, but much less harshly on the planet. So it would be more local production, perhaps more self-production of the kinds of things that we need, less acquisition of things, but maybe more music, more social life, more community, more capacity to be with others and doing things that you care about, more hobbies, more things that you like, and not working, 90 hours a week. Lisa? That's, yes. Right, that's true. Yes, that's another word I should have added there. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Sandra. Sure. Sandra.
Just a comment. I mean, you focus, understandably, very much on business. A long time ago, I had a discussion with a woman called Barbara Hayes from the Economic Council for Corporate Responsibility, and I drew her a diagram like the one that we saw yesterday with business in the middle and all these stakeholders. And she said, "You've got it wrong. Society's in the middle and business is just one of the stakeholders." And that's the problem. Business is one of the stakeholders. Exactly. We are part of society. But in order to do all the things you want, you've got to change society, and that's a lot bigger job than changing business.
Absolutely, but I draw the environment as the big circle, and three circles: business, civil society, and government, sort of intersecting circles, because the boundaries are blurring to them. That's a whole other discussion that we could have. So, absolutely, but what is necessary to support human existence on this planet in any capacity whatsoever is a certain set of ecological conditions that we are on the edge of pushing beyond, and that is a very scary prospect. And there's enough scientific evidence, and then there's some new thinking by McKibben and James Lovelock and others to suggest that we're already pushing kind of those limits and may have already exceeded some of them. So.